Running AI locally or calling a cloud API, which one wins? The answer used to be simple, but okay, the open weight capability gap just closed. Hardware dropped to $500, and the EU AI Act goes live in August with penalties up to 7% of global revenue. So yeah, the whole trade-off map it's completely changed. So most builders, they just pick the cloud API by default, right? And almost none of them have actually run the one calculation that'd tell them whether that's even the right call. So let's run it. Okay, so a cloud API charges you per token. No upfront cost, infinite elasticity, you pay for exactly what you use, which is honestly beautiful for getting started. The catch though is the meter never stops. Every single request costs money forever, and that line just goes up and to the right as you grow. A local LLM, it kind of flips the shape of that whole cost. You buy a GPU once, you eat some electricity, and after that each request is, well, it's close to free. High fixed cost, near zero marginal cost. Two completely different curves, and here's the thing, they cross. And that crossing, that's the whole game. Below the crossover point, cloud is cheaper, because you're not paying for idle hardware, right? Above it, local wins, and it just keeps winning harder the more volume you push. So roughly, a 7 billion parameter model on a single mid-range GPU breaks even somewhere around, what, 500,000 tokens a day, sustained? A 70 billion model needs more like 2 million tokens a day to pay for itself. And look, those aren't laws of physics, they're rough waypoints, but they tell you the order of magnitude where the math flips. Now here's where it gets interesting, and where the simple story kind of falls apart. There aren't two options, there's three. You can self-host, you can pay a premium frontier API, or you can call a commodity open weight API, where someone else hosts an open model and just rents it to you for almost nothing. There was this one 36-month comparison for a medium-sized team, and it laid this out really cleanly. The local consumer setup landed around $33,000 over 3 years. The big provider API came in higher, around $38,000, but the hosted open weight API, around $11,000. So the cheapest option by a mile was just letting someone else host a cheap open model. So yeah, local is cheaper is wrong about as often as it's right. At moderate volume, commodity hosted APIs undercut everyone, including your own hardware. Local only pulls ahead at, genuinely high, steady volume. That's the real map, and that's the part the hype kind of skips over. Okay, so that handles cost. But cost was never really the reason people defaulted to the cloud. The reason was quality. So let's talk about whether that reason still holds up. So for 2 years, the argument against going local was simple. The open models were just worse. You went to the cloud because that's where the smart models lived, full stop. And that gap it's nearly evaporated. On the chatbot arena, where models get ranked head-to-head by human preference, the best open weight model now sits about 50 ELO points behind the top proprietary one. 2 years ago, that gap was in the hundreds. 50 points. That's a rounding error you'll rarely even feel in practice. And look at coding, which is what most of you actually care about. On SWE-bench Verified, which is a test that makes models fix real GitHub issues, the leading open weight models are clustered around 80%. The proprietary ceiling is 80.9. They're touching. And on some of the narrower coding benchmarks, the open models are just straight up ahead. And the cost difference, it's kind of absurd. One leading open model runs something like 30 times cheaper per output token than the top closed frontier model, while sitting within a few points of it on code. Now, two honest caveats here, because the benchmark story is a bit slipperier than the headline. First, those tests are contested. SWE-bench has been flagged for possible training data contamination, and some coding benchmarks are basically saturated. Everyone scores in the 90s, so they've kind of stopped telling you much. Second, the gap hasn't closed everywhere. It's closed tightest on the structured stuff, code, math, step-by-step reasoning. It's still real on creative writing, on subtle instruction following, on the hardest long horizon reasoning. So if your product lives in that last category, yeah, the Frontier API still earns its premium. But for coding with AI, for structured automation, for the bread and butter agent work most people are building, the quality excuse is gone. You're no longer trading away capability to go local. You're trading away a few points you probably won't even notice. So, okay, if cost can favor local and quality no longer blocks it, why doesn't everyone self-host? Because there's a cost that never shows up on the GPU invoice. So here's the number that wrecks most self-hosting plans. Running a model in production, properly, takes 20 to 30% of a senior engineer's time. Deployment, monitoring, version updates, being on call when the thing falls over at 2 a.m. Put a salary against that and you're looking at, what, $3,000 to $6,000 a month in human labor that no hardware comparison ever includes. And that's the line item that flips the math right back. It was a 12-month production analysis that found teams consistently blow their TCO projections, and this was the reason, every time. They counted the GPU and the electricity. They just forgot the person babysitting the GPU. For a small team, that omission alone can make the cloud cheaper at, honestly, any realistic volume, because the cloud provider's the one eating that labor. Now, the tooling's gotten dramatically better here, to be fair. You've got Ollama and LM Studio for running models on a single machine with almost no setup, OpenWeb UI if you want a clean chat front end over your own model, and vLLM when you need to actually serve a bunch of users at once. The ecosystem even consolidated. Hugging Face's TGI went into maintenance mode, so the production choice now is, it's basically vLLM and llama.cpp. So friction's way down. But look, easy to start is not free to operate. Someone still owns it. And the second trap, that's the shape of your traffic. Every crossover number I just gave you, it assumes sustained load, the GPU pinned above 60% utilization around the clock. And real workloads, they almost never look like that. They spike during business hours and idle overnight. They burst during a campaign and go quiet after. And idle hardware is, it's pure waste. You paid for that GPU whether it's working or not. So the cloud's killer feature is you pay nothing for the quiet hours. So a builder who calculates their crossover point off total monthly volume, then deploys, then watches their actual traffic concentrate into like a few peak hours, they kind of discover they were never really at crossover at all. Bursty favors cloud, steady favors local. Know which one you actually are before you go buy a card. Okay, so that's the operational reality. There's one more force on this map, and unlike the others, this one doesn't care about your spreadsheet. So sometimes sending data to an API, it isn't a cost question, it's a legal one. And that's the vector reshaping this fastest. The EU AI Act becomes fully applicable in August 2026. For high-risk systems, it demands documented data governance, real auditability, and the penalties top out at 7% of global annual turnover. That's higher than GDPR's 4%. It's the sharpest set of teeth any AI regulation has shown. And underneath that sits a genuinely unresolved conflict. The US Cloud Act lets the US government reach data held by US companies, even when that data is parked on servers inside the EU. And GDPR's Article 48 says, more or less, yeah, not so fast. Those two have not been reconciled, even after the courts blessed the latest EU-US data framework. So the practical fallout, right? A cloud API with an EU endpoint may still not satisfy a strict reading of European data sovereignty, because the company running it answers to a US subpoena. But when you self-host, that entire problem just disappears, because the data never leaves your network. There's nothing to subpoena, nothing crossing a border, nothing to even argue about. You get GDPR, HIPAA, and SOC 2 alignment by architecture rather than by promise. For a hospital, a bank, a regulated enterprise, that's not a convenience. That's the only version that's legal. And there's a colder kind of risk too, and it's got nothing to do with regulators. In June 2026, a US export control directive forced Anthropic to suspend 2 of its models for every user on the planet, overnight. So teams that had wired their whole pipeline to one provider, they just woke up to a dead dependency they couldn't fix. Add that to the routine API outages, the model deprecations that force you to re-engineer prompts when a provider sunsets a version, and yeah, a clear point emerges. When you build on a cloud API, you've taken on geopolitics and a vendor's roadmap as silent dependencies. A self-hosted model just stays pinned exactly where you left it, running on your terms. So with all 4 axes on the table now, cost, capability, ops, and sovereignty, here's how you actually decide. So don't ask local or cloud. Ask where your specific workload sits on the map, and honestly, the answer just falls out. Call the cloud API if your traffic is bursty or low volume, if you're still iterating fast and changing models weekly, if you need the absolute top of the frontier for creative or hard reasoning work, or, if you just don't have anyone to own production ops. For most people starting out, that's still the right default, and there's no shame in it. The convenience is real, and you're not yet paying enough for it to matter. Go local when your volume's high and steady, when your GPU would actually stay busy, when latency has to be tight, sub 100 millisecond first token with no network round trip, or when compliance just takes the choice out of your hands. At that point, you're no longer buying convenience, you're paying a premium for convenience you've kinda outgrown. And look, keep the third option in view, because it quietly wins more often than either. A commodity open-weight API. Someone else hosts a cheap open model, you call it for cents, you skip the hardware and the ops engineer entirely. At moderate volume, that's frequently the cheapest path on the whole board. So the durable takeaway is just this. The honest comparison, it was never privacy versus convenience. It's CapEx versus rent, scored against your real volume, your real traffic shape, your real compliance exposure, and the salary of whoever keeps it running. Run that arithmetic before you reach for the API key. The default's shifted under everyone, and yeah, most builders haven't noticed.